Okay. Hi, everybody. How are we doing today? Who have we got with us? Let's have some highs in the chat. Would love to hear where you're from, what newsletter you're working on, or what publication you work with. Yeah, great to see some familiar faces. Hopefully, everyone knows the drill for these masterclasses by now. We'll wait 2 or 3 minutes, give the stragglers a chance to jump in with us, and then we will get started. Awesome. Great to see some familiar faces. While we're waiting for the 2 or 3 minutes for stragglers to jump in and join us, is the audio working okay? Can everyone hear me okay? I did have some mic issues earlier today, so I'm hoping those have been fixed. Perfect stuff. Awesome. So we've got a real mix here. We've got some larger newsletters, we've got some small newsletters, we've got some local newsletters, we've got some very niche, some very broad. Looks great. Perfect stuff. Okay, I think we've waited 3 minutes. I think that's long enough. Let's just jump in. As always, if you have questions as we go through, just stick them in the chat. I'm going to run through today in about 40 to 45 minutes, and we're going to take the last 15 or 20 minutes to use for questions and really to discuss anything that comes up here or any questions that you have about growing newsletters in general. So stick the questions in the chat, and we'll come back and make sure we have time for as many as possible at the end. Awesome stuff. Well, in that case, let's jump straight in. So we are obviously here to talk about growing newsletters to 1 million subscribers and beyond. And I asked for some questions on Twitter. I asked if anyone had any questions that they wanted to ask about this. And one of the questions I got was, have you yourself grown a newsletter to 1 million subscribers? And I haven't. So I thought, well, hang on, I need to be able to justify why we're putting on this masterclass today, rather than inviting someone to do it who's already grown a newsletter to 1 million subscribers. And what I realized was, even though this isn't something that I have done myself, most people who've grown a newsletter to 1 million subscribers have only done it for one specific newsletter. And the things that help them to reach that 1 million subscriber goal aren't actually very replicable with other newsletters. So you get sort of a view on how to grow a specific newsletter to 1 million subscribers, but not how to think about growing newsletters to very large audiences in general. So what I did was I thought, okay, well, I spend all day, every day at SparkLoop, and have done for the past couple of years, basically getting to work really closely with most of the bigger and fastest growing newsletters. I get to help them with referral programs, with partner programs, with all different kinds of weird growth stuff. I get to spend hours working with them on all this kind of stuff. And I get to see, even on the stuff that we don't do personally, exactly what's working and what isn't. And that's, at this point, pretty much every major sort of fast growing newsletter that you can think of. So that's kind of the approach that I'm going to be taking today. And what we're here to talk about is that roadmap. Once you get past the 10,000 or the 100,000 subscriber mark, how can you grow as quickly and as effectively as possible to 1 million subscribers and beyond? We did a masterclass last week on the much earlier stage, on the 100 to 10,000 subscriber milestones. And if that's where you're currently finding yourself, probably this masterclass, the stuff we're going to talk about today, it's going to be a little bit boring for you. It's going to be something that isn't super relevant. And you might be better off just heading to YouTube, putting in SparkLoop Growth Masterclass, and watching the recording from last week's episode if you haven't watched that already. So that's just something in advance. What we are talking about today is going to be very specifically aimed at people who are very, very serious about growing a publication or a media company to 1 million subscribers or more. So bear that in mind. So the place that I want to start today is, like I said, looking at all of these larger newsletters that have managed to reach 1 million subscribers and above, and figuring out, okay, well, what do all these newsletters that are doing really, really well have in common? Because it's not necessarily the growth channels that they're using. It's not the audience type. It's not the messaging they're using. It's very difficult if you look at all these newsletters and really understand what was happening inside them as they grew to work out what they actually have in common that you can use to make sure that you're on the path to growing to 1 million subscribers and beyond as well. And I've broken that down into what I think are the most important components. And I think that breaks down into what I call the 3 bare necessities and 3 key growth levers. So as far as I can tell from looking at all these different newsletters that have hit 1 million subscribers and beyond, there are 3 things that they have that are absolutely table stakes, that every newsletter that wants to grow to be a very large, successful newsletter has to have. The first, no shock, is going to be amazing content. The second, again, not really a huge shock, is that they have to have a large enough viable market. If you want to grow a newsletter to 1 million subscribers, that newsletter can't be specifically for your own very small town or very small city somewhere in the US, for example. If there aren't 1 million people who would be interested in your newsletter, obviously you're not going to have a chance to hit that goal. And then finally, the less obvious one, which we're going to talk about in a lot more detail later, is that your newsletter needs some kind of unfair advantage when it comes to free distribution or free discovery of your newsletter. The really, really hard thing to crack for growing a newsletter is that they don't have any inbuilt discovery. It's not like being on a social platform or on YouTube or on something like that, where discovery is built in and people can find you. By default, you could write the best content in the world, but nobody's ever going to discover it if it's hidden in the inbox. So if you want to hit 1 million subscribers or above, we're going to need to discover an unfair advantage of some kind. And that's what we're going to talk about in a second. After those 3 the 3 necessities that you absolutely have to have, that isn't in itself enough, though. That's just sort of the prerequisite. You also need to be really, really good at pulling on the 3 main growth levers that will affect how quickly your newsletter grows. And those 3 new key levers are the subscriber acquisition rate, the revenue you make per subscriber, and the retention rate of subscribers. So let's break that down very quickly. Basically, if you want to grow to 1 million subscribers, you need to be getting a lot of new subscribers through the door. You also need to be retaining a lot of those subscribers, so they can't all be churning and unsubscribing every time you send out an email. And most importantly, you need to have a good subscriber lifetime value. You need to be making a decent amount of revenue from each subscriber that you have. The lower the retention rate, the more aggressive you'll need to be in growth. And as your newsletter grows, the rate of growth or the rate of subscriber acquisition, if your retention isn't very good, would have to grow so high that it becomes impossible to grow week by week, because you'd have to add so many subscribers each week to make up for the subscribers that you're losing. So all 3 of these levers play a really big part in working out whether your newsletter is going to hit 100,000 subscribers, 500,000, 1 million, or beyond. And what we can't do, and this is going to be a recurring theme sort of throughout today's talk, is that if you want to grow a really big, successful newsletter, surprisingly little of the important stuff you need to think about is actually on the pure growth side. So you may have been coming into today and expecting, we're going to talk a lot about different channels and strategies and tactics and stuff on the growth side. That's not really, it turns out, what's most important. And it's also not really where most newsletters are doing a bad job. The most important stuff is in the fundamentals here. It's in making sure the revenue per subscriber is right, making sure the retention rate is high, and then thinking about the subscriber acquisition rate as well. So I've pulled all of that together, and the bulk of what we're going to talk about today is based around 5 questions that I think you should ask yourself, and I think every newsletter operator should ask themselves if they want to grow to 1 million subscribers. And And we're going to leave aside the real fundamentals of having really great content, because I'm not an expert on that, and I'm sure you're thinking about that all day, every day already, I hope. So we're going to leave that aside, and we're going to look at the 5 main questions that I think you should ask yourself if you want to grow to 1 million subscribers. And the first question is your market large enough to sustain your ambitions? Now, we've touched on that very briefly. Obviously, if you want to hit 1 million subscribers, you need a market that is large enough to sustain that. You need to have at least 1 million people who are interested in what you're writing, probably a lot more. But there are different ways to think about this. And the fundamental 2 ways to think about it are, if your newsletter, as it stands, doesn't have a large enough market to reach 1 million subscribers, there are 2 things you can do really effectively that I've seen to grow that potential market. The first one is to expand the same audience that you already have. So expand within your existing audience of subscribers to show them new content. So if you already have, let's say, a newsletter with 100,000 subscribers, for example, like the Betches newsletter here, which I think is an amazing example, and you're writing to them on a specific topic, instead of trying to grow that audience, why not add in a different newsletter that the same people would also like to read? At that point, you're sending to 200,000 subscribers every week. Now, the majority of them are the same people, but you have in the same way effectively grown the newsletter. I think this is a really, really underrated thing that not very many newsletters do well. And if you want to look into how you can do this, I think going over to, I think it's betches.co and signing up for their newsletter, they are one of the best at how they've really segmented out what was 1 newsletter into, at this point, 9 newsletters and counting. The other thing you can do is you can take the opposite approach if you need to grow your market. And you can take the same content or the same content playbook that you've developed, and you can bring that to new audiences. Like the 6 a.m. City example, where they have this very, very effective playbook now for local media, where they take that and replicate it in different cities for different audiences. And it doesn't need to be a local media publication to do that. You could easily do this in niche topics, where you take the playbook, you hire someone else to write it, and you expand using the same resources that you have, using the same playbook to grow that way as well. So there are basically 2 ways to think about growing your market size, which may be slightly non-obvious. The second question we're going to look at, and that I think you should ask yourselves, is how you can increase subscriber lifetime value. So when it comes to subscriber lifetime value, obviously, the higher that subscriber lifetime value, the more money you're going to be able to afford to pay for growth effectively, when it all sort of shakes out at the end. And the big thing that we've noticed over the last year and a half at SparkLoop is there is a clear difference between newsletters that have a high subscriber lifetime value and newsletters that have a low subscriber lifetime value. And the big difference seems to be that the newsletters with a high subscriber lifetime value are doing a very effective job at adding in multiple streams of revenue, multiple sources of revenue. So we've taken data via surveys, via questionnaires, via calculators on, I think at this point, close to 1,000 very large and very quickly growing newsletters and media publications. And what we've seen is that on average, newsletters that have at least 3 revenue streams, so that could be paid subscriptions, ads, affiliates, it could be info products, events, paid subscriptions, any mix, 3 or more, tend to in general have more than a 2 times higher subscriber lifetime value than newsletters with less than 3 revenue streams. And these tend to be pretty easy to add. So if your newsletter is one that is monetized only in one way and you're looking to grow it, weirdly enough, the thing that I'd be focusing on right now wouldn't actually be how can I get more subscribers? It would be how can I be looking for quick wins to increase the revenue that I make per subscriber by adding in different sources of monetization. And 2 examples I want to pull up there again. I already took the Betches example before, but I'm going to pull them in again with their branded faux pas drink that they launched this summer, which they launched as just a standalone D2C product to their existing audience. I think is a really nice example. And then a slightly easier one that everybody can do is James Clear's recent launch of his Atomic Habits pen to his newsletter audience, which costs $75. I don't have insider knowledge on exactly how many purchases there were, but I'm betting a lot and a very easy way to increase the lifetime value of your subscribers. And of course, there's other things you could be doing here. You could be doing affiliates, you could be doing events, you could be adding in premium memberships, you could be expanding into sponsorships if you haven't already, and we'll touch on some of that a little bit later. But I think thinking out of the box here and being more aggressive in how you monetize is going to be one of the main factors in how quickly and if you can reach 100,000 or 1 million subscribers or more. Carrying on from there on the money side for the third question. It's great if you have a really high subscriber lifetime value. If you're making on average $20 or $30, for example, from each newsletter subscriber on average, that's great. But it doesn't really help your growth very much if it takes you 12 or 15 or 24 months to earn that revenue. Because if you're having to wait that long to be paid back, obviously you're not going to be able to invest very much into growth. So if your main focus is growing your newsletter and you want to do that very quickly and very aggressively, the main thing you want to be thinking about, I think, is how can you reduce your payback period? So the payback period, basically what that means in the context of a newsletter is how many months, how long does it take for any new subscriber that you add today to generate more revenue for you than it costs to acquire them. So super simple, super basic example. If it costs you $2 to acquire a subscriber and you earn on average $1 per month per subscriber, that means that your payback period is 2 months. So this is something that every newsletter that is trying to grow to even 100,000 subscribers, but definitely 1 million subscribers and beyond, absolutely has to have an idea of. If you haven't calculated this, that should be the first thing that you do after this masterclass to go and think about this and get as good an estimate as you can on what that payback period is in general, and also for different channels and sources of subscribers, because it will be different based on how you acquired them. So let's take an example of why this is super, super important, okay, and how you can improve this. So I'm going to take this example of the Morning Stew newsletter, which obviously is completely made up, and we're going to pretend that this newsletter exists, that it has a subscriber lifetime value of $20, and that it monetizes with a simple monthly paid subscription. So it's just a paid newsletter, people sign up and they pay monthly. And you're tasked to grow this newsletter, and your task is basically, you can spend whatever you want on growing this newsletter, but we have to make that money back within 2 months. The payback period has to be within 2 months. Well, if you're monetizing only via a monthly subscription, that means that in month 2, the payback period, you're most likely only going to be making $2 on average per subscriber. So the maximum amount of money that you can afford to spend on this newsletter on growth in this scenario before you go into an unacceptable loss is $2 per subscriber. Now, it's not the end of the world. $2 is an okay CPA to spend, but it's not particularly aggressive. It's not going to give you an unfair advantage if you want to grow very quickly. But there are some tweaks that we can make to this, to the monetization, to bring that payback period way down and to front load more of the revenue. And that's going to make a huge difference. So, for example, without changing the lifetime value of the subscriber, you could switch from doing monthly subscriptions to doing quarterly paid subscriptions. So instead of getting $5 upfront, you get $15 upfront, for example. And then you could add in paid recommendations via our new Upscribe tool, for example, so that when somebody signs up to your newsletter, you show them 2 or 3 other newsletters that are non-competing that they might want to opt into. And each of those newsletters, if the person subscribes, will pay you a small commission, somewhere between $2 and $5. And if you do that on average, you'll increase the subscriber lifetime value by anywhere between $4 to $8 normally. So if you just add in that little extra revenue source from Upscribe that comes in within the first 30 days, and you shift the payments or the revenue from monthly to quarterly so that you make $15 in the first month instead of $5, all of a sudden, with the same lifetime value of that subscriber, with the same product, with the same payback period, you can now afford to pay $8, $9, $10 per new subscriber without going over budget rather than the $2 before, which gives you a lot more room to be very aggressive in acquisition when it comes to sponsoring newsletters, running Facebook ads, and all that kind of thing. So this is something that's really important, and it's something that's probably the most underrated area, I think, of when newsletters are thinking about how they can increase their growth. It's not necessarily that your newsletter needs to earn more to be able to pay more for growth. It's that your newsletter needs to earn more earlier and sooner to be able to be more aggressive when it comes to growth. Here's just a quick overview of what that might look like on a month-to-month basis. So you can see in the end, it will all even out, but over the first months, this just allows you to be much, much more aggressive in the second scenario. Even in the first month, for example, if you need to make that money back in the first month, you can spend in effect 7 times as much without going over budget, without having problems and needing an injection of cash to fund the growth. So we have 2 more questions to look at. The first one here, question number 4, is how you can create an unfair advantage. And if you remember back at the very beginning of the conversation today, I was talking about how there are basically 3 table stakes that you need: great content, and the third one here, how you can create an unfair advantage. And every newsletter that I've seen that has made it to 1 million subscribers or more has had at least one unfair advantage, some way to generate a huge amount of free discoverability to get their newsletter in front of the right audience. And when it comes to this unfair advantage, as far as I can tell, there are basically 2 different ways to think about them. There are unfair advantages that everybody can do, guaranteed unfair advantages. Anyone with a newsletter can tap into these and build an unfair advantage into their newsletter to generate huge amounts of free discovery. And then there are situational unfair advantages. And these are unfair advantages that not everybody who's growing a newsletter necessarily has access to, or they don't all necessarily have access to the same ones. So when you're thinking about your free newsletter growth, a lot of the time it's easy to get bogged down in the details of, should we do a cross promotion with this person, or should we cross promote to this channel, or so on. But if your goal is to hit 1 million subscribers and above, you can't really be focusing too much on those small things once you get past 10, 20, 30,000 subscribers. You need to be thinking about those 1 or 2 big unfair advantages you can create for free discovery that are really going to move the needle. And when it comes to the situational ones, which I'll tackle first, I think really there are only 3 that I've discovered. One of them is SEO, which depending on your newsletter may work amazingly for you, but it also may not. For example, if you have a daily newsletter, you're probably not going to benefit from SEO very much. Whereas if you have a newsletter that's on a super niche topic, that's more advice focused rather than education or news, that could be a really good source of unfair free traffic over time. The social media, obviously. Some of the fastest growing newsletters that I've seen today are growing very quickly because their founders, their creators, have huge followings and have worked out how to game LinkedIn or Twitter or TikTok or something like that, maybe YouTube. I've seen creators at the moment, for example, who are getting 1,000 new email subscribers or more every single day from posting on LinkedIn. Now, the issue is that may not be a good source of traffic for you. It may not be something that you can replicate. So all of these are very situational. We can't provide a lot of advice on them. And you have to just think through and assess which of these you might be able to build into your own newsletter. Maybe you already have one that you can leverage, something that you have to think about and look into for yourself. What we can talk about, though, on the other side, is guaranteed unfair advantages. And these are unfair advantages, sources of huge amounts of free traffic, free discovery that everybody can build in, absolutely everybody. And the two main ones that we've discovered there are referral programs, on the one hand, so word of mouth, basically, and cross promotions, which is tapping into partners, other newsletters, audiences to help each other grow quickly. And we'll look at some examples there. So the one I want to talk about on the situational side, which is underrated, is partnerships. And that's a huge trend that I've seen over the last year and a half, where if you're looking to grow an audience, you just go and collaborate with a partner who already has an audience. For example, we've seen trends where Neil Patrick Harris, for example, just launched his Wondercade newsletter in cooperation with partners to make that, grow very, very quickly and tap into his existing audience. And they're all different kinds of partners that you could tap into. That could be press partners. Those could be existing newsletter partners who are willing to come on board with some sort of relationship if it's a non-competing thing. There are different partners with huge audiences that you can tap into to gain some sort of unfair advantage. But of course, not everybody has access to those partners. Not everybody can make that work for their newsletter. But it's something that's worth thinking about, especially if that's the kind of thing that you might have access to. And then moving on to the more general, applicable unfair advantages that you can build. I think referral programs in 2022, 2023 are going to be one of the main ones. And it's one of the ones that no matter who you are, no matter what your newsletter is, it will absolutely be able to rely on this long term to generate huge amounts of growth and discovery. On average, newsletters with a good referral program tend to grow about 35% faster. And the most important thing is that A, this happens whether you have 100 subscribers or 2 million subscribers, and B, the quality of those subscribers is extremely high. So you're getting faster growth that scales, that is effectively free, and most importantly, that is likely to stay subscribed. So as you grow, it keeps being more and more effective. The challenge with referral programs, as far as we've seen at SparkLoop, and we've helped set up most of the big ones, is that the later you add in a referral program, the longer it takes to start working. Now, most newsletters that come to us, if they have an audience of 100,000 or 200,000 subscribers or even 1 million, they'll come to us and they'll say, okay, we want to add in a referral program and we just kind of expect it's going to work really well from month one. And that most of the time isn't what happens. Because when you're introducing a new thing, it takes a while to understand the correct wording. It takes a while to build the loyalty. It takes a while to build this into the culture of the newsletter. And what we tend to see is if you have a referral program from day one, then it will be in there from the very beginning and it will work almost straight away. But the longer you leave it, the later you leave it, the more time it takes for that to become an accepted sort of part of the newsletter and to really start driving results. So it's definitely something that's worth thinking about, and it's not the kind of thing that you necessarily want to be putting off. You should try and be doing this as soon as possible and giving it a good 3 to 9 months to test and to grow into as a channel that works for you in the same way you would with other channels like SEO, for example. And then the other source of unfair advantage, the other source of free growth that I think is really worth looking at in 2023 are cross promotions. Now, cross promotions obviously is something that is huge in basically every other kind of, every other medium of content, podcasts, YouTube videos, and so on, where there isn't really a huge inbuilt discovery feature like podcasts. But for some reason, especially larger newsletters, at least traditionally, they haven't really collaborated too much. And over the last couple of months and into 2023, we've seen that change in a big way. As newsletters realize, okay, we're not really competing with most of these other newsletters for audiences. It's not a question of do they read our newsletter or their newsletter, but as long as it's the same demographic, but slightly different topics or different takes, then there's much, much more to be gained from collaborating together rather than trying to compete, because there isn't much competition there. They're not substitutes for each other. And the playbook here, as far as we've seen, is basically to go out to find 2 or 3 newsletters that have a complementary audience to yours. So it's the same audience, but not talking about the exact same thing in the exact same way. You wouldn't read either that newsletter or another newsletter. And then collaborate together to display those newsletters as a one-click opt-in option, for example, using our Upscribe widget at SparkLoop right after the subscriber subscribes. So for every single new subscriber who subscribes, you show them a little pop-up with 2 or 3 other newsletters that they might want to sign up to. The opt-in rate on that is super high. In general, it'll be 50 to 60%, some cases even higher. And the quality of subscriber coming through is also super high. So this takes a little bit of time to set up. But if you do this with 2 other newsletters or 3 other newsletters that are growing at the same speed as you, in effect, what you can do is you can double or even triple in some cases your growth rate basically overnight for free, just by working together, collaborating, and helping each other grow. So if you came to me and said, Louis, I have 100,000 or 200,000 subscribers, what's the one thing that I can do to grow 2 or 3 times faster this year? What's the one thing that's going to make the biggest difference? Without a doubt, this would be the biggest lever that you can pull, and definitely the first thing that you would want to work on. And we're going to move finally into question 5, which is, we've just talked about free growth and how important that is to have a source of unfair advantage there. But if you want to grow quickly, if you want to hit 1 million subscribers in any reasonable time frame, most likely you want to be leveraging paid growth as well. And as we've already talked about, the challenge with paid growth isn't really what channels to use. It's how do you make the business part of your newsletter work so that you can afford to spend and invest aggressively on paid growth like you should do. And that comes back to understanding your subscriber lifetime value, and it comes back to understanding your payback period and shortening that payback period so that you generate more revenue upfront. Not a fun thing to hear if you're working at a publication and your sole responsibility is growth, because a lot of it's out of your hands. But it's important to take that back to your team and to look at what you can do to improve that, because that's going to be the big thing that's going to allow you to be more aggressive. If you have a very, very good understanding of your lifetime value, a very good understanding of your payback period and how you can reduce that, that allows you to get a lot more buy-in from your team, from your boss and from your executive team, to be much more aggressive on the paid growth front, which will allow you to speed up that roadmap to 1 million subscribers significantly. Most of the newsletters, not all of them, but most of the newsletters that I've seen that have reached 1 million subscribers or more, at least 25 to 30, 40% of that growth has come from paid sources. And if you can afford to outspend the competition, then you basically have a license to almost print subscribers and reach that mark very, very quickly. So there are 2 channels I think are particularly interesting when it comes to paid growth that I'm going to highlight here today. The first one is what we call a partner program. And the easiest way to think of this is as an affiliate program for your newsletter. So we have a tool that makes this very easy to do at SparkLoop. Most of the larger newsletters that you probably read and are aware of today have started using this now, and it is becoming rapidly the main source of, if not all growth, at least paid growth in terms of high quality subscribers for the fastest growing publications out there today. So the way it works is very simple. Basically, you create, in effect, an affiliate program for your newsletter. You decide exactly how much you want to spend per new subscriber, for example, $2 per new subscriber, and you decide exactly what the criteria are for who counts as a high quality subscriber that you want to pay for. For example, someone from a specific country who stays subscribed for a specific amount of time and who takes certain actions in the newsletter and who wasn't already on the newsletter already, obviously. So you define what a high quality subscriber is for you, you define the price you want to pay, and then we take that partner program, we take those conditions out to thousands of newsletters, thousands of potential partners. You can invite your own, and we let them opt in and send you through new subscribers. They recommend you to their own audiences in their newsletter, on social media, and so on. And you just pay basically for the results at the end of the month. So when they send you through a subscriber who meets your high quality criteria, if you wanted to pay $2 for those subscribers, you just pay $2 for each of them that come through. And this makes paid growth dramatically easier. It allows you to tap into other newsletter audiences. And you can easily scale this to thousands of subscribers a day at a CPA that you know that you can afford, that fits into your budget and into your payback period. So if you haven't done this already and you have some budget to pay for audience growth, this is probably the number one most effective thing you can do on the paid side. The other thing you can do at the moment is paid social ads. And this isn't anything new, right? This is the main wave of this came up with the Skim and Morning Brew and others 4 or 5 years ago when they leveraged how affordable social ads were at the time. Now, social ads aren't that affordable anymore, so they've kind of dropped off a little bit in popularity over the last year or two. Still, there are ways to make them work very well, especially if you're being smart about your payback period and bringing that revenue up front to be in the first month or two. So a great place to start there is by watching the last or the second to last masterclass that we did on Facebook ads with Matt McGarry, who runs Facebook ads and social ads for many of the largest and fastest growing newsletters out there. So that's a definite must watch if you're going to do this. And the second thing is obviously you want to be adding in that Upscribe paid recommendations widget that we talked about before, because if you can make on average $4 to $6 or $4 to $8 per new subscriber that comes in from Facebook ads, and you're only paying $2, $3, $4 per subscriber who comes in, that allows you to scale your paid acquisition efforts on social hugely. It gives you flexibility today that nobody had 6 months or 12 months ago. And the fastest growing newsletters that we've seen on paid social today are doing this. They're leveraging their ability to run Facebook ads into an Upscribe paid widget where they're recommending other non-competing newsletters that their audience really enjoys and really likes. And they're in effect getting free or effectively free growth from Facebook and from other social channels because of it. The last one I want to touch on very quickly here when it comes to paid growth is that you can also go out and you can acquire other audiences and other forms of distribution. So this is one that's become popular over the last year and a half, 2 years, with acquisitions of Morning Brew, The Hustle, and others by larger media companies, by larger brands. But we're now seeing this consolidation happening a lot more on the smaller scale as well. So the obvious place to look into is, for example, acquiring other newsletters that have a similar audience or an overlapping audience where you can run the same playbook and where you can inject your audience, your existing audience, into that new audience and vice versa. So I think a really nice example of that was the Daily Upside, who recently acquired Patent Drop, which was a related newsletter. And I think we're going to see a lot more of this year. And we have some interesting stuff going on at the background in SparkLoop to help identify newsletters that might be a good source of acquisition, one that you might want to reach out to. If that's something that is on your roadmap for growth, definitely worth shooting us an email, because we have some interesting things that can make that a lot easier that will be coming in the very near future. But it's more when it comes to acquiring audiences and distribution. It's more than just acquiring other newsletters. I think some other really good examples are Morning Brew recently acquiring Our Future, which is a digital media startup that helps create short form video. So they're acquiring, in effect, the ability to create and the ability to own upstream sources of distribution, upstream sources of discovery that can then funnel back into the newsletter. So I think that's one that's definitely worth looking into. And I also really like the idea of acquiring underperforming assets or under-monetized assets. So if there are new websites, Facebook pages, Instagram account creators, all of these, in effect, sources of traffic, sources of views out there that exist that are struggling to monetize or are under-monetized, that don't necessarily have a good newsletter of their own, partnering up or acquiring them can be hugely effective. I've seen recently newsletters go out and look for under-monetized websites, for example, that do very well in SEO, that get a huge amount of traffic and can generate a huge number of subscribers, but that are under monetized and don't know what to do with that traffic. And partnering up, acquiring, investing in those sources, and then leveraging that to add in new subscribers to your newsletter that you can do a good job of monetizing is hugely, hugely underrated, I think. And we're going to see a lot more of that sort of shrewd niche acquisitions and investing over the next year or two. So that's really everything that I wanted to cover in detail today. I think those 5 questions hopefully will be super useful to anybody who is thinking about this journey. And yeah, I think we'll open it up for questions. If you have questions about any of this or anything, it can be, we can go more into the tactic, we can go more into the strategy, we can take a look at some examples. Would love to hear them. Share your thoughts, share those questions. I'll give us a minute or two to add them in, and then we'll run through in the chat. Thanks. Okay, so let's look. Do we have any questions? Let's start from the beginning. Okay, so we have a question about what site did I recommend to check out for expanding number of newsletters. Can you add more context on that? I don't quite understand the question. If you can add any more, maybe I'm just forgetting something there. That would be very useful. Then we have a question about who's doing a good job of running Facebook ads to an Upscribe page. This is one of those unfortunate things where, because it's very new, I'm not quite sure what I'm allowed to share yet. Let's just say, and I hope we're going to have a case study on this within the next 2 or 3 weeks that I'll be able to send out to everybody who's on our email list at SparkLoop. And you'll probably see it yourself if you go and subscribe to newsletters from Facebook ads, for example. But there are now at this point several major publications that are sort of close to household names with hundreds of thousands or millions of subscribers who are running Upscribe on their Facebook ads pages. And in general, they're making, I think it's about $5.30 per subscriber, which allows them to be very aggressive on the growth side. So unfortunately, I don't think I can share any names today, but if you give us 2 or 3 weeks to get the clearance and the approval, we'll have some very interesting case studies coming out in February, basically. Great. So next question from Nate. Nate has plateaued in his list growth and he has essentially 0 net growth. And his question is the only real way to fix this to improve list retention? And the answer to that is no. You have 3 levers that we talked about, right, to improve your growth if you have plateaued. So what I would want to be looking at is, have you plateaued because your retention is very low, or have you plateaued because your retention is sort of normal for a newsletter of your size, but because your growth is slower than you would want, right? So that's the first thing that I would be looking at there. The first thing I'd be trying to assess. If it's on the retention side, then obviously that's a content issue. It's an onboarding issue. It's an alignment of the frequency of content and the timing issue. That's something you'd have to work on outside of the sort of the growth arena. If it turns out that the retention isn't really the issue and the bigger issue is just that you're not growing as quickly as you should be, I think the first place you want to look there is, again, is that an issue with the free sources of growth that you haven't found your unfair advantage yet that's scalable, or is it an issue with the paid sources of growth? Do you not have the short enough payback period? Do you not have the lifetime value per subscriber to be able to invest into growth like you'd need to? Or is it somewhere in the middle and a mix of both? So that's how I would be approaching this. And then really what I would be doing from there, once you've worked that out, is focusing all in on how can I build that unfair advantage, whether it's referrals, whether it's SEO, whether it's whatever it is. Cross promotions is almost definitely going to get you there using the Upscribe widget. Or is it on the paid side that you need to be looking at how you can generate that revenue earlier to be more aggressive? And just to be perfectly honest, and I'm going on a little bit here, but I would say 70-75% of the time, when we talk to growth people at newsletters about what they can do to grow faster, often they don't know their subscriber lifetime value particularly well. They normally don't have a good handle on the payback period at all. And their executive team tends to not know that so well either. And just reframing that and saying, hey, on average, you make $3 a subscriber in the first month alone. But for some reason, you've decided to cap your budget on growth at $1 per subscriber. That's probably what's holding you back. Unlocking that knowledge and making it more obvious is I would say 70% of the time, the biggest hurdle that you have to overcome, and just realizing that you can afford to grow a lot more aggressively. Perfect. Hope that answers the question, Nate. Zoe, for a geographically specific newsletter, I'm not sure how to find overlapping newsletters to cross-promote with. It's a great point. And we don't think when it comes to cross-promotion, if you have a local media newsletter, it probably isn't, in most cases, with the exception of New York and LA and really big sort of locations, it probably isn't worth focusing on how you can find other local newsletters to cross-promote with. What you'd want to do there is to tap into other sources of potential partnerships. So we tend to focus a lot in general, I think, as newsletter growth people, on how can we get other newsletters to cross-promote us. And we tend to be quite picky about what we call a newsletter. But if you have a local media business, I can guarantee there are tens or hundreds of local businesses, whether those are physical locations, whether those are consumer brands, D2C brands, that kind of thing, that are collecting hundreds, thousands of email addresses from local people every week. There's no reason that you can't take the same concepts of cross-promoting and the Upscribe widget out to those locations as well, and say, add this to your sign-up form, add this here, cross-promote with us. Your audience would likely like to discover a lot of those great, awesome locations in the local area anyway, or those local businesses might be interested in being paid for recommending you. There's no reason that can't be a very effective playbook of expanding sort of your definition of a newsletter to work with just local businesses that collect email addresses in effect. Great. Let's do a couple more. So Clint is asking, he has 15,000 subscribers for a niche topic newsletter. And he's asking what the 3 things that I do this year would be in order to maximize growth, given that the revenue per subscriber is already high. So we're going to assume that the revenue per subscriber is high, and also that the payback period, the revenue up front, is high as well. So you can justify investing into the into growth. Off the top of my head, I think it depends really on your growth goals, and I think it depends on where you're trying to end up. If you're trying to grow the newsletter very quickly, but you also have, you want this to be something that hits 100,000 subscribers and 1 million subscribers, or as close to that as possible, rather than, how can I get to 30,000 subscribers this year as quickly as possible? I think those are all slightly different things you'd have to look at. And I think the way that I would approach this isn't to say, I don't think I can really give you an example of like the 3 things that are going to work for you. I think you have to flip the question on its head, and I think you have to ask yourself, okay, what are the sort of the 3 main blockers to our newsletter growing faster? Is it that we don't have free distribution? Is it that we can't afford the paid distribution? Is it that our market size just isn't big enough and we need to either expand within that audience, within that sort of existing audience, different things, or take the playbook we have to slightly different audiences? Really, those 3 questions are the things that I'd be asking myself. And then based on that, it should be sort of more obvious to say, well, okay, we need to figure out SEO, or we need to add in the recommendations widget and cross promotions, or we need to do a referral program, or we need to add in a new product, or we need to add in a new newsletter line, or whatever that turns out to be. But I don't think me sort of saying, oh, well, you should do referrals, cross promotions, and acquire another newsletter is going to be useful at this point. I think you have to flip it on its head and think about it more from the other direction. I know it's a bit of a weaselly answer, but I think it's the, the most useful one, I'm afraid. So there's a specific question about referral programs that I'll add very quickly. I'll answer very quickly, which is if you have a referral program, can you introduce that to existing subscribers or only to new ones who subscribe afterwards? Absolutely. If you have a referral program, you absolutely want to introduce it to everybody, as many people as possible in your audience, because you never know who the people are who would be able to refer a huge amount of people. There isn't actually that much correlation between people who open every edition of your newsletter and people who are going to be the best referrers. There's some overlap, but it's not as big as you think. So you want to have everybody in there from day one for sure. Perfect. So there's a quick question on the more on the technical side about partnering with local businesses like a zoo or an art museum. The only, again, we're allowed to plug ourselves because it is our masterclass, but the only tool that I'm aware of that you can use to do that would be our either our partner program feature at SparkLoop or our Upscribe feature at SparkLoop to do that cross promotion, because it is the only one that works across different email platforms. There are others that are specific to like the smaller starter out newsletter platforms that are sort of built in, that have very basic functionality. But if you want to work with random other newsletters and other businesses, then Upscribe or the partner program tools that we have would be definitely the best way to go, and I'm 99% sure the only way to go there. Rosalind has a really good question about contests and sweepstakes. Do we know of any newsletters that are doing this well, and do we have any tips or learnings? So I thought it's a really good question, Rosalind. I thought a long time today about whether I should include sweepstakes, giveaways, contests, prize draws, that kind of thing, as one of the growth channels. And I know it's sort of a not so secret that a lot of newsletters that talk about other growth channels that they use to grow very quickly actually got a lot of their growth, especially in the early days, from doing these sweepstakes and contests and so on. The challenge with that is obviously that the quality of most of those subscribers is very, very low. So you are adding in new subscribers, but the huge majority of them are going to have to be filtered out very quickly. So you do very quickly reach a scale and a place where you can't really, you can't scale any further with it. And that happens relatively quickly, in our opinion. That's why I didn't include it as one of the channels, because it's not an unfair advantage. It's not something that's truly scalable as far as I've seen. Now, there are more exciting ways to make this scalable. So if you're the one that is hosting the sweepstake or the giveaway, I think that's really exciting. I think it's really exciting if you do that and you partner with other complementary newsletters using the Upscribe widget, and you also go out and source your own partners and providers of the giveaway prizes. So I think there is a playbook there. I don't think it's quite been figured out by anyone yet. I think there's potential for that, but I don't think it comes from joining in on giveaways that are being arranged on a third-party platform. I think it comes from going out to your existing sponsors, from identifying D2C brands, for example, or B2B brands that just have huge numbers of subscribers that aren't really considered a newsletter as such, and partnering up with them to run that and being the one that coordinates and brings them in. So I think there is potential there, but it isn't something that we've seen a really good playbook on once you get past a certain point, to be honest. Perfect. When it comes, I saw someone asking about subscriber lifetime value. We do have a free calculator over at SparkLoop. If you put in into Google SparkLoop and subscriber lifetime value, I'll include that link in the email after the session with the recording as well. I will send the recording out, obviously. I'll include the link in there if you want to calculate a rough idea of what your subscriber lifetime value is. Perfect. Does anyone else have any questions? I'm going to take one or two more if we have any more, and then we'll wrap up and call it a day. And obviously, if you do have any more questions that we didn't get time to answer, or if you have any sort of more private questions, shoot me a DM on Twitter, shoot me an email. I'm more than happy to answer those in private or jump on a call if we can help. Great. So Michelle has one, and we'll make that the last or the second to last, unless anyone else has one, which is a quick question about the Upscribe program and the partner program. So the partner program at SparkLoop very specifically is like the affiliate program, where you pay for a set amount that you decide per new subscriber, and you get connected with partners of all kinds, other newsletters, partners, influencers that you invite to promote you. So that's just your way of managing, basically, very easily paying different partners for the subscribers, only the high quality ones that they send you through. We just automate that whole process that you used to have to do with an intern or two and hundreds of spreadsheets and emails and complaints back and forth. That's what the partner program is. The Upscribe program specifically is just the widget, the recommendation tool that you add post opt-in. So when someone subscribes to your newsletter, it pops up with the other recommendations that you're making. Those can be free, those can be paid. It's up to you. If you're doing them paid, that's great, because again, it unlocks so much of that revenue up front that you can afford to scale super efficiently and super quickly on the paid side, and make way more revenue per subscriber. If you're doing it free, that's normally because you've set up some sort of reciprocal agreement with 2 or 3 other newsletters. That's by far the best way to do this for free, is to create that little group of 2 or 3 yourself. We do help with that at SparkLoop, especially if you have a slightly larger newsletter. We can help you identify good fit audiences and make those introductions and help set that up. So if that's something you're interested in, we have people on our team who are experts at that and do that all day, every day. Perfect. Does anyone have any last questions? I can do one more, and then we'll call it a day. Some stuff. Brandon, thank you for the feature request. We can take a look at the calculator and see if we can update that. I think we can most likely do that. It will go on the the list of things to look at. It might not be something that happens tomorrow or next week, but we'll try for sure. Awesome. Well, thank you everyone for joining in. If you have any questions or any feedback, you know where to find me. You know where to find us. We're always happy to talk about this kind of stuff. Thank you very much for joining. Yes, we will be sending out the links and the recording afterwards. It may take a couple of days, but it will come out by email, so it will hit your inbox. Thank you all very much. Have a great rest of the day.